So in the first video in the series we made the stand for this lamp. You can see me adjust it here, change the length of the pole. All of the logic and geometry for that's encapsulated inside this one molecule here called stand, and now I'm going to create a second molecule for creating the shade, and I'm doing it from scratch. So I'm going to switch back to the spoke that I created in the first video. I've got my molecule with my stand. I'm going to create another molecule, and I'm just going to disconnect that. This molecule will be for the shade. I'm going to dive into the shade molecule and start creating the shade. It's based on a polysphere, and there's more than one type of polysphere that you can choose from. By default you'll get an icosphere, which is one type of geometry. A columns and row sphere is the other one, and that's what we want. If I just select points and change between the two, you can see that there's a different construction there. The reason that I want to use the columns and rows type of sphere is that I want to be able to adjust the theta value, which is only available on the columns and rows type sphere. There are three inputs to this sphere that I want to be able to control parametrically, and one of them is radius. I'll create a sticky node for that. One is the center, which is a vector, and that's going to be useful for placing the sphere, or placing the shade rather, on top of the lampstand. The third one is the theta value, which I'm calling cut in this. I'll rather type float in there and call that cut. And I'm going to want cut to be able to move between 0 and 180 degrees. Let's just hook these up and see what they'll do. I think radius is pretty straightforward. We're starting with 0 there, so obviously going to have to bolster that up. Now that's getting huge, so I'm going to limit the radius to 20. And the center, well, I'll hook that up to the center. Doesn't really matter inside this molecule. It's really only for adjusting the position of the shade from outside the molecule, so we can just leave that. Cut, I'm going to hook up to the theta start. So let's see what that does. Okay, so we can chop off part of our sphere, and by default I want that to be 90 degrees, so it's a half sphere. It's not actually, it's where are we? Okay, I'll put that, here we go, 90. Half a sphere. I want to duplicate that that half sphere, but I want to turn it upside down, so I'm going to create a rotate. Spin it 180 degrees around the x-axis, and at the moment you can see if I switch between each of those nodes or select both of them, we've got the whole sphere. But I actually want that rotation to use center pivot, so that what we end up with is these kind of overlapping half spheres like this. Next thing I'm going to do is collect these two half spheres together in a scale atom, and if I shift drag that one, I can connect both the geometry from the polysphere and from the rotated geometry there through to the scale node that I just created. I also want to be able to scale, stretch this shape along the y-axis, so I'm going to create a vertical scale parameter, sticky for parameter, vertical scale, make it sticky. I'm going to feed that into an XYZ to vector and set the Y component from that. Now this XYZ to vector, the X and Z need to both be set to 1 or else our shape's going to disappear when we connect this up to the scale input. Right, at the moment it's flat and very kind of strange looking because the vertical scale is currently at 0. Let's make the default value for it 1 and the minimum, maybe the minimum we could have at 0 and maximum at 10. And we'll set the current scale just to 1. Of course I can adjust that and now we get this vertical stretch. Finally, for the shade I want to be able to adjust the color. So this is just the same as what we did with the stand. Create a color parameter and I'll just adjust it to something that's not black. I'm going to make that sticky. Create a set color atom which the color feeds into, and also feed the geometry that we want to color into the set color node, and then set color node through to the output. And we're done for creating the shade. We have now a stand molecule and a shade molecule, but the shade is currently sitting underneath the stand, which is not what we want. Luckily, when we created the stand earlier, we created an output which is a Y value that represents the top of the stand. So if I create an XYZ to vector and feed that Y value into the XYZ to vector and then use that vector to center the shade, we now have it in the right place. I'm going to connect the stand and the shade to a camera node, which is a slightly different kind of node from most of the ones we've seen so far. What I've done is I've taken the geometry from the stand and the shade and I've fed them into the camera node, and I've also taken passed that geometry through into the output node too. But while that camera node is selected, it will remember a whole bunch of things about how I've set the view to be on that camera. So I can turn off the origin and the grid, so we've just got nothing in the background. I can select this transparent / image box and put a URL for an image in there, and it'll load that in off the web. I can tint that image, so I'm going to make it a bit of a bluish colour. There we go. And there are a huge range of other options too. As I said, there'll be another video which goes into those in detail. But the important thing to remember is that the camera view is only visible while the camera node is selected. If I click back off that, it doesn't affect the angle or the zoom factor or anything of the camera node. So this is the lamp which I had created previously, and there's one small difference here. The stand output a vector here, so it could get directly inputted into the center input for the shade. No need to convert using an XYZ to vector. What I've done with this one is I've exposed all of the parameters which I want to be able to see in spoke mode. So here's the ones for the stand and here's the ones for the shade. The parameter groups, so the grouping into stand and shade that you can see over here in the parameter window is based on these parameter group nodes, and they actually create a title and a divider within the parameter window, and where that sits in relation to each of these orange sticky nodes just depends on where they vertically are in comparison to each one. So you can see as I move the stand parameter group up and down, it moves correspondingly in the parameter window. So now that I have this set up, we're pretty good to go in terms of being able to just view this in spoke mode. And we now have a nicely adjustable parametric lamp.